DND number 11, Circle of Life, in Jesus' name, Part 3, Chapter 11. Yes! The word was uttered loudly and with fierceness and with the pump of a fist. Gabe Tanner was so filled with pride for young Eric that he couldn't contain himself. Young Eric had just put down his second opponent of the day. Both had been 6 stands. Both had been the approximate age and weight of the men young Eric would face a week from Saturday. One more round and he'd move to fight his toughest competitor, the current Keno Challenge champion, his uncle, Joey Adams. Joey was a 7th Dan. It would be the telling match. Is Eric ready for the challenge or not? Is his being only a 3rd Dan a disadvantage? Is his being so young a disadvantage? Will his abduction play a part in how he fights? Gabe glanced over at Joey as he stretched out. Just looking at Joey, he was formidable. He was 38 years old. His physique was rock hard. He was known for his incredible speed. His skill was almost unbeatable. The only people known to give him competition were Ricky and Mark, and Gabe wasn't sure if they could still do that. Now, young Eric was rising up, and it was very exciting and very cool. Gabe glanced over at Jordan, curious to see the admiration in her eyes because she didn't hide her emotions well, and he loved seeing how much she adored her boyfriend. But she wasn't smiling. She was not only frowning, she was grimacing. He rose from where he sat on the floor. He had to move through several rows of people to get to her. The large studio was filled to capacity. Many honored Keno students had been invited to watch today's proceedings, plus the families of those chosen to spar against Gabe and young Eric. He approached Jordan and knelt down in front of her. "Hey, Jordan, you okay?" She looked at the handsome young man and shook her head. "Gabe, I don't feel so good." "What's going on? I mean, how bad do you feel? Get you to the hospital bad, or you need an aspirin bad?" She smiled. "How about I need 30 aspirins bad?" "So you're in pain?" He sighed. "I didn't think to bring the pain pills with me. I haven't been thinking very clearly lately. Gee, I wonder why. If I could just elevate my leg, it would help." He nodded and looked around. There were too many people where she was sitting. "Okay, let's get you moved over there, closer to the door where there's some room, and I'll fix you up." He handed her the crutches that were leaning against the wall beside her and helped her stand, folded her chair and lifted it, and started clearing the way, mumbling, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, coming through." He finally sat her down in the area he'd had an eye on, then went to find another chair. He finally had to grab one from the conference room, placed it in front of her, lifted her foot, and carefully placed it on the chair. He shook his head. He didn't like the looks of it and disappeared again as he went searching for something else. He came back with his bag, put the sports bag on the chair, and lifted her leg up onto it. He nodded. "How's that?" She sighed. "Much better. Thanks, Gabe." He grinned. "Oh, we're not done yet." He went to a woman, knelt down in front of her, and spoke to her, motioning toward Jordan. The woman shook her head. He went to the next woman. Finally, a woman nodded, bent down, pulled her purse from under the chair, and shook some pills from a bottle into his hand. Then he ran to grab a bottle of water from the cooler and brought it back to her. "This is only ibuprofen, but it might take the edge off. I brought you 4, so you can take 2 now and 2 later." She held her hand out. He put the pills in her palm, and she threw back all 4 and drank some water. He smiled. "Or that. So do you need anything else?" She shook her head. "Thanks, Gabe. You're so sweet." "Yeah, that's what they all say." She giggled. He placed a hand on her head. "Father, ease her pain. In Jesus' name, amen," he whispered. She blinked up at him. "Thank you." "My pleasure. Gotta go. Eric's about to fight Agent Adams, and it's gonna be awesome." He headed back to where he'd been sitting on the floor. She watched him sit down and act like he hadn't just done something lovely. 3, says Gabe, is full of light, and she could see that. He's kind of like a grown man and a little kid in the same body. Both Gabe and Jordan had missed the last round of 3 sparring the last guy, but now 3 was gearing up to spar Joey Adams, his own uncle. 3 was resting, drinking water, while Joey was stretching and hopping up and down, shaking out his arms, getting loose. She looked from Three's face, seemingly relaxed, to Grandmaster Keno's face, also relaxed, to Joey's face, also relaxed. So why was she so nervous? Her heart was racing. He needed to do well against Joey if he was going to do well in the challenge, and he needed to do well in the challenge so his movie will do well when it comes out in a month. And she knew Three was worried that he'd be the first one in the family to ever lose a challenge. This moment seemed ultra important, but everyone seemed so relaxed. She drew a deep breath. She wished Mrs. Keno was here to keep her calm, but she had to go with Desi and Alec to their first visit to the obstetrician. It was then she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. She looked up. It was Breeze Adams, Joey's wife. She smiled. "It's gonna be okay." Jordan nodded. "It just seems like such an important moment." "Well, it is. But they all have their priorities straight, and they all practice let go and let God, and they do it well." "Let go and let God," Jordan murmured. "Okay." She nodded and drew a deep breath. "So, whatever will be, will be." "Pretty much. My Joey will give it his all because that's the only thing that will help young Eric. And Eric will give his all because he wants to do well. And really, that's all they can do, right? Why worry about the outcome?" Jordan nodded and sat up straight as the two men walked to the middle of the mat. "Joey, don't hold back," Grandmaster Keno ordered. Joey nodded. "Eric, you know what I told you?" Eric nodded. "What'd you tell him?" Joey asked. "Wouldn't you like to know?" young Eric quipped. Everyone laughed. Grandmaster Keno stepped back and Master Foreman stepped forward. "Okay, guys, what I say goes. The only difference between this match and the one Saturday week is young Eric has on head protection. Fight like it's real." Joey held out his hand. "Love you, Eric." Young Eric grinned and shook hands. "Love you too, Uncle Joey. Now stop trying to get in my head." The crowd laughed again. "Bow to me," Master Foreman commanded. They did. "Bow to each other." They did. "Fight." They did. Young Eric allowed Joey to come at him, blocking like his life depended on it, which in some ways it did. Joey was known for his speed, but young Eric was handling it beautifully, dodging or blocking every punch, every kick, being patient and waiting for his opening. He saw it, he took it, but Joey also saw it and blocked. Joey blocked everything that young Eric threw at him. This went back and forth the whole round, and when the time was called, the two received a giant ovation and whistles. They went to their corners. Jason spoke to Joey, giving him pointers, telling him that he may not be seeing for himself. Grandmaster Keno spoke quietly to young Eric, had him breathe deeply, drink some water, gave him a sequence, and sent him back out. Second round began like the first had, but this time young Eric went with the sequence Grandmaster Keno had just given him and surprised Joey with a roundhouse to the face right at the moment Joey had thrown a spinning back. The kick caught Joey off balance, landed solidly against his cheek, whipping his head around and sending him down. Young Eric went after the downed man, but Joey rolled, kicked up, and grabbed young Eric between his thighs and brought Eric down too. They rolled together over and over, finally both let go and jumped to their feet, and the crowd went crazy. The rest of the round was nothing more than a series of blocks performed well by both men. When Three had connected with Joey and sent him down, Jordan's heart thrilled. It was happening. Three kept saying he'd eventually get good enough to put his uncle down, and he'd done it. That meant the challenge was at least doable. She clapped hard and yelled for her guy. The second round ended, and Grandmaster Keno whispered into young Eric's ear. Jordan wondered what kind of instruction he was giving him. It was an amazing skill to be able to watch two fighters moving as fast as these two and be able to tell them what to do, what not to do, and figure out how to win. She wondered if in his third and final round would they simply let time wind down or try to win. The round began, and it was obvious they would try to win. Joey came at young Eric with everything, but Eric's focus was phenomenal. His speed seemed to equal Joey's. He blocked and dodged and kicked and punched, and Joey finally connected powerfully with Eric's midsection and knocked him down. But he sprang back up before Joey was able to take advantage. Young Eric threw several punches, all blocked, but then came with a series of kicks, then switched, ending with an uppercut, and caught Joey's chin. The crowd went crazy again. However, Joey didn't go down. They went back and forth again, kicking, blocking, punching, blocking. And right at the end, Eric spun and kicked Joey in the back, knocking him off balance and sending him down briefly. He jumped back up, threw a few punches, and the round ended. Joey, sweating profusely, smiled and nodded at young Eric. Boy, you are freaking gonna kick some butt. Young Eric tried to catch his breath, but was breathing too hard to speak and simply nodded and threw himself into his uncle's arms. They hugged a long time, and Joey rubbed his knuckles over his nephew's head, while the crowd of Keno students gave them a standing ovation. Jordan had to stand in order to see, so she moved her foot off Gabe's bag, and lowered it gingerly to the floor and got to her feet. She felt the relief 3 must be feeling. He'd done well against his uncle, against the current challenge champion. That meant he'd do well Saturday week. Jordan watched as Grandmaster Foreman went to the doors, unlocked them, and allowed several reporters with their cameramen into the studio. There was now going to be a press conference. Jordan was in pain again because she was standing, so she sat back down and put her foot back up. Some of the crowd was leaving, while others milled around conversing with other students. Jordan watched Shelley Keno approach her husband. They were so sweet to watch. He smiled at her and put his arms around her. She stood on her toes and kissed him quickly, then spoke to him. Jordan figured she was telling him what a good teacher he was. She would know, since he made her a Mart champion way back when they first met. Ricky Keno was nodding and laughing and speaking with his son, obviously proud of what he'd just done. Ricky had helped coach him these past few weeks. Well, to be real, he'd actually coached him his whole life. Ricky had trained 3 since he was old enough to walk, she'd been told. So he deserved credit, too, for what 3 had achieved. She glanced over at her boyfriend. 3 was using a towel to dry his face and head, then ran his hand through his thick, dark hair. Lord, he was beautiful, she thought. He was smiling, flashing that bright white smile and accepting congratulatory handshakes and pats on the back, and they were all getting ready to be interviewed by the reporters. Jordan turned to watch Breeze Adams hug her husband. He didn't actually lose the fight, but he didn't win either, and that was as it should be, Jordan thought. It was like the circle of life. One grows old, and young ones emerge. The crowd had pretty much dissipated, and Grandmaster Keno 3, Ricky Keno, Gabe Tanner, and Joey Adams stood in front of the cameras. Grandmaster Keno spoke first, saying that they will entertain a few questions from the reporters about the upcoming challenge and Mini-Mart only. He said they would appreciate the reporters refraining from asking questions about the kidnapping, about their new children, and about his and Gabe's experience a few months ago, since those subjects are weighty and would require more respect than a few flippantly asked questions. Jordan tried to listen to the questions and answers. Gabe was, as usual, highly entertaining. He's so flippant and so sincere, so confident and so humble, so irreverent and so spiritual, all at the same time. The reporter asked, "So, how's your confidence level, Gabe, going into the Mini-Mart after coming back from, well, you know what we're not supposed to talk about?" Gabe grinned. "Well, that is a great way to not ask about something. Let's see if I can not tell you the answer," he replied, putting the word not in finger quotes. "If I wasn't confident that I will succeed, I wouldn't allow myself to represent Grandmaster Keno or my own martial arts master, Master Apple. It's been a struggle to come back from, well, you know what, and make sure my body can handle the stress. But God has helped me to heal quickly because of, like, you know, when I was in a coma," he said, whispering the word. "Jesus gave me a hug, and if I was back there in that place right now, he'd probably give me a high five, or at least a fist bump, so I'm feeling pretty darn confident." Everyone chuckled. Young Eric reached up and ruffled Gabe's hair. Jordan wanted to hear the rest of the little conference, but the pain in her leg was making her antsy. She had to get up, walk around. She felt closed in, panicked, almost claustrophobic, and she wondered if this was how 3 felt when he was in jail. It felt like the walls were closing in on her. Shelley Keno and Breeze Adams had already left. They said they had to get back to the children. Jordan walked out toward the foyer area, circling around, looking at the myriad of trophies and pictures and ribbons. After some time, she glanced back into the studio. 3 was talking, answering some questions. She wished she could hear, but knew she'd be able to see the interview completely on TV, in the comfort of the Kino's den. She was breathing hard and looked back outside. She needed some air, and making a quick decision, she headed out the doors. She could see there was a large group of people out in the parking lot, but she ignored them and went to her left, down the sidewalk alongside of the studio. She could see ahead that there was a small playground/park area on the side lawn of the studio, and she headed toward it. It was slow going with her crutches, and she only got about halfway there when she heard someone call her name. "Jordan! Jordan Brooks!" She looked around but couldn't figure out who had called her name. The only people she could see was the large group out in the parking lot. But now they all seemed to be looking at her. It seemed the entire group was headed in her direction. She thought it was an optical illusion at first, and then thought she was dizzy and they weren't really headed toward her, not the whole group. However, they did all get closer and closer to her. She was puzzled at first and then realized they were all also reporters and paparazzi, and they were hurtling questions at her at the same time. She shook her head at the first one who arrived and shoved a microphone toward her face. "Jordan, can you tell us what happened to you Monday night?" Jordan shook her head. "We heard you were beaten and raped by Garrett Clark, a serial rapist." Jordan looked over at the man who said it, then back to the woman who asked the first question. "Well, you've obviously been beaten," the first woman said. "Tell us what happened." Jordan drew a deep breath. "I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to talk about it because it's an ongoing case." "Aw, come on, Miss Brooks. The public deserves to know," another person said loudly. She looked over at another woman. I can't say anything. If you'll excuse me," she began, but was cut off by the person who stepped up from the direction she'd been heading. "Okay," another said, "don't talk about the rape. Tell us about Eric Kino III. How long have you known each other, and are you exclusive?" Jordan didn't know what to say. She only nodded. "Do you think he still has a chance in hell of winning the challenge since his abduction?" another called out. She looked over at the man as if he were crazy, but she knew the Kinos never predicted the outcome, so she didn't respond. "Jordan, is it true you play softball at UCLA?" a woman asked. Jordan nodded. "Jordan, do you now live with Eric at his parents' home?" She shook her head. "Jordan, what do you think about your boyfriend killing your stepfather?" "Jordan, will you at least tell us what it's like to be included in the Kino family activities?" "Jordan, have you met the new little Kino children? What do you think about them?" "Some people say they're not quite right, mentally." "What do you think about that?" Jordan felt like she was going to pass out as she looked from face to face. Suddenly her vision was blocked by a large figure. She has no comment. She breathed a sigh of relief at the masculine voice. "Eric, how do you think you'll do in the challenge after having been kidnapped?" "It has no bearing on the challenge," he said briefly as he put his arm around Jordan's shoulder and ushered her inside the building. Once inside, he helped her to a chair and knelt down in front of her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. I don't even know what was happening. They were all asking really stupid or really personal questions, and they wouldn't let me pass." "Yeah, they must feel really powerful to impede the progress of a young girl on crutches. They were like vultures gathering at roadkill." He sighed and touched his fingers to her cheek. "Sorry about that." "Nothing for you to apologize about," she murmured. "I just wanted some air. I didn't realize the parking lot was full of reporters." "Those were mostly paparazzi," he said. "They can be ruthless. Gabe told me that you're in pain." She nodded. "I left the pills at home." "Well, let's get you home and situated." "Okay. And 3, I have to say, you were awesome today." He smiled. "I feel good about what I did today, so thanks." "Does your Uncle Joey feel bad?" Eric chuckled. "No, of course not. He's the one who wanted to pass the torch, and now he has." Gabe approached and handed Jordan a bottle of water. "How's she doing?" Eric took the bottle, uncapped it, and handed it to Jordan. The paparazzi had her cornered and were pecking at her eyes, but didn't do any real damage. "Hey, brother, thanks for taking care of my girl earlier." He shrugged. "It's just what I do." Young Eric chuckled. You know what, Gabe? Even if you don't end up with my sister, you'll always be my brother. Well, the only way I don't end up with Taylor is because Taylor doesn't want me anymore. Well, Jordan said softly, Taylor is a brilliant girl, so that won't happen. Come on, babe, let's get you home, young Eric said. New scene. It's Wednesday, October 30th, late afternoon, Gabe Tanner Community Center, Pine Forest, Georgia. Jericho Jones glanced to his left as he drove down Main Street, and what he saw had him slamming on his brakes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He pulled his pickup over at the curb and watched. She was actually doing it right. She had the foot of what looked to be a 32-foot extension ladder up against the building and was walking it upright, rung by rung. Once the ladder was upright against the building, she put her hands on either side of the ladder and looked up at it, then slightly bent her knees, lifted the ladder, stepped backward about 6 feet, and set it back down. He let out an apprehensive breath. The girl was small, maybe 5.5 feet tall. She was athletic looking. She wore jeans, and he could tell she had muscular thighs. That's about all he could tell because she wore an oversized, thick UGA sweatshirt that came past her hips. Her blonde hair was blowing in the brisk, cold wind and whipping around her face. He watched as the girl knelt down and lifted the ladder briefly to set the spikes in the grass. She then stepped on the first rung and jumped up and down a few times. He nodded his approval. The girl then grabbed the rope, pulled, and pushed up on the extension and raised the ladder a few feet. She did it again until it was out of her reach. Then she pulled the rope alone and went up another short distance and stopped. She jerked on the rope again, but the ladder was stuck. She looked up, pulling on the rope, and the ladder started to sway to the left. He jumped from his truck and ran across the street, across the leaf-covered lawn, and up behind the girl. Grabbing the ladder, he steadied it and righted it. She looked up over her shoulder, a look of surprise on her face. His breath caught and his heart stopped. He was looking into the most beautiful face he'd ever seen, staring into the bluest eyes he'd ever seen. She raised her eyebrows at him. He made himself speak. Hey, I saw you struggling with this ladder and decided to help. She made a face. I wasn't struggling. He grinned. Just calling it like I see it. Whatever, she mumbled. He placed his hand above hers on the rope. Let me do this, please, before you hurt yourself. Fine, she said as she let go. He pulled the rope and finished extending the ladder and made sure it was locked in, then checked the stability and backed away. There you go. Thank you, she said flippantly. You're welcome. So what do you need the ladder for? She pointed at a white scroll lying on the ground. I was going to hang that banner up there on the front of the building. He nodded. Will you allow me to help you? She looked around, instinctively touched the waistband of her jeans, and finally nodded. Sure, if you've got your heart set on it. He smiled. Oh, I really do. He picked up the large scroll made of vinyl. Before he could, the girl stepped up onto the ladder. You hand me that and hold the ladder, she ordered. Sighing, he nodded and handed her the scroll, which was very heavy. You may as well go ahead and let it unroll and take just the top corner up and let the rest of the banner hang down because once you get up there, you're going to need 2 hands to tie the banner. She nodded. You're right. She grabbed the top corner and let the rest of the banner drop to the ground, then started up the ladder. When she got to the circle bolt up on the face of the brick building, she attached the cord by tying a square knot, then went down a few rungs and tied the lower cord to the corresponding circle bolt. He nodded at her as she came down. Good job. On the knots. She smiled sweetly. Oh, I'm a good Girl Scout. He smiled and lowered the extension of the ladder and carried to the other side of the building. The girl straightened out the banner and drug it by the top right corner. He took it from her and started up the ladder. My turn, he quipped. Hold the ladder, he called down as he went up and quickly tied the banner. He came back down, immediately lowered the extension and took the ladder down and laid it on its side on the ground. She nodded at him. Well, sir, thank you for your assistance. It's my pleasure. He backed up and looked up at the banner and read it aloud. Gabe Tanner Community Center. Grand opening. Call 800-TANNER-1 for info. He looked down at her. So this is Gabe Tanner's flagship center. She nodded. Yes, why? Do you know him? He shook his head. No, I only know of him. From what I can tell, he's the real deal. A great kid. Will he be at the grand opening? Unfortunately, no. She looked him over. You look familiar. Are you from around here? He smiled and shook his head. No, I'm from Rome. Italy? He laughed. Rome, Georgia. He held out his hand. I'm Jericho Jones. She smiled and shook his hand. Rose. Rose Anderson. He smiled. It's very nice to meet you, Rose Anderson. She rolled her eyes. And he tells dad jokes, she muttered. Her eyes narrowed. So, why do you look familiar? Are you famous or something? He shook his head. Not really. I have a twin brother, though, but you wouldn't know him unless you're big into football. She clapped her hands together. Joshua Jones, wide receiver for the Dolphins, high school All-American, full ride at Alabama. His mouth fell open. Wow. Now that's a surprise. Why? Because girls don't understand football? Well, no. I mean, most girls don't usually care enough about football to know, like, a random player's history. Joshua Jones is not random. She grinned. But to be honest, when I was in high school, I had a boyfriend who was totally a fan of your brother. I was a sophomore, my boyfriend was a senior, and your brother and I guess you too graduated the year before. We hated Alabama, of course, but we rooted for Joshua Jones. Did you play too? He sighed and nodded. I did in high school. I was gonna have a full ride at UGA, but I got hurt. I ended up going in a different direction. She nodded. Well, sorry you got hurt. He shrugged. When God closes a door, he opens a window. Her eyes blinked. Now he had her attention. So, if you're not from around here, what are you doing here? She asked. I'm here for a meeting with your mayor and your fire chief. Oh, okay. That's interesting. And I'd better get going before I'm late and make a bad impression. She nodded. Well, Jericho Jones, if you're still hanging around, you should stop by the community center and see what we have going on. Like tomorrow night, we're going to offer a fall costume party and games for the kids with so many goodies that it might make them totally forget about vampires and ghosts. He nodded. That sounds like a good goal. If I'm still here, I may just stop by. He offered a small salute. It's nice to meet you, Rose Anderson. Be careful on that ladder. She watched him walk away across the large front lawn. He looked to be almost as tall as her father, maybe about 6'3", broad shoulders, well-muscled. She frowned. He was dressed quite casually for a meeting with the mayor, jeans and a tan long-sleeved T-shirt that was tight around his biceps, or rather, because of his biceps. A navy blue quilted vest and work boots completed the ensemble. He trotted across Main Street and got in a black pickup truck with a red stripe down the side. She nodded in approval. Bending over to lift the heavy ladder, she carried it inside the center and lugged it all the way to the giant utility closet. Her mind was going over the giant list in her head of things that had to be done before 3 tomorrow afternoon. The community center had now been officially open for a week. Last weekend they had a fall festival, and it was so much fun and highly attended. They had all kinds of booths set up, different games for kids to play, arts and crafts to be sold, the county's best cooks presenting their baked goodies or grilling expertise. It brought in lots of revenue for the town. The day ended with a dance in the newly renovated gym with a band from Macon, Georgia, who were growing in popularity and played only for the cost of their accommodations. Boys of Creation were getting the best of that deal, though, because Isla August of Teenspotter.com had sent one of her new employees to cover the boys, and their social media sites blew up. The group was part country, part rock, all Christian, and all American. The day had been a huge success on so many levels. The fact that it had Gabe's name on it was a big reason for that. Gabe Tanner, Fallen for Fun and Family, was a hit and had pulled in lots of money for the foundation. This next weekend, the first weekend in November, would be the grand opening, and they had a whole lot to do between now and then. For now, Rose walked through the center looking for things she may have missed that needed to be done. The large front reception area was decked out still with the fall theme. It used to be the office for teachers and administrators when it was an elementary school, but all of the offices had been taken out, and it was a large open space with a high counter to the left. That counter was made of beautiful wood that looked like a giant butcher block, only darker and shinier. Currently, sitting behind that counter was Daisy, tapping away on a computer. She smiled up at her sister. "Almost time to head home?" Daisy asked. Rose nodded with a smile. "I'm going to walk the place and see if I've missed anything. What are you up to right now?" "I'm updating the website, sending out the invite reminders for those who registered to join the center, and make sure they know they can volunteer to help the center or the foundation in many different ways. Already several local churches have opted to join forces because they trust in Gabe's good name. You know, like he's a true Christian, he's honest, he won't waste their time or money, etc." "Do you feel overwhelmed or like keeping up with this is too much for one person?" Rose asked. Daisy smiled. "It's a full-time job, but for now, I can handle it, and thanks for asking." "Well, talk to me if I put too much on you." "Well, you know I will. I'm just happy to be able to be employed right here in my hometown and feel like I'm doing some good in the world." Rose nodded. "I feel the same way." "What about your degree?" "Well, I'm only a few credits away from graduating. My decision to take a light load won't hinder me at all." "What about Lily?" "She'll graduate by winter break." Rose nodded. "So has everyone else gone home?" "No, Ms. Murphy is back looking over the classrooms where the kids will trick or treat. She says she wants to make sure everything is ready and also that nothing is against our rules. No blood and gore or devils or vampires or witches, etc." "What a fine Mrs. Murphy is," Rose said with a glow. "I mean, she's been my rock in this. Her talents were sure going to waste. Now she's helping run the classes and activities for the community and tutoring students and literally being my right-hand man." "She's awesome," Daisy agreed. "She says this center has been a huge boost for her and for many others because she knew there were a lot of other people who were struggling in our community just like she was, and she feels like she can now reach out to find solutions for them. The work we're doing here, Rose, it's amazing." Rose nodded. "And it's all thanks to the faith of our little brother. He's so strong." "And God is so good," Daisy added. Rose smiled. "Yes, he is." New scene. It's October 31st, the wee hours of Thursday morning, South Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Jordan clawed at the hands that squeezed her throat. She looked up into the dark eyes that glared at her. The eyes were black, completely black. The eyes looked into hers, nodding, almost smiling. They had her, and they weren't going to simply let her go. She struggled, she cried, she kicked, she prayed. And she finally woke and sat straight up, sucking in breath. Sitting in bed, catching her breath, she looked around the dark room. There was a little bit of light coming in the window from the lights that were on the outer gates of the property. That wasn't enough, and she leaned over and turned on the lamp. Breathing a sigh of relief, she sat still, going over in her mind the dream, or rather, the nightmare she'd just had. She'd been back on those rocks near the dumpster. The guy was looking into her eyes as he strangled her. He was enjoying her fear and her pain. He seemed to be more than one person. It seemed that there were a bunch of people all laughing at her, willing her to die. Breathing hard, Jordan kicked the covers off. "I'm losing my mind," she muttered. She felt like she was suffocating, like she was trapped, like she needed to get up and get out, like there wasn't enough space, enough room. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she reached for the crutches and made her way to the bathroom. When she came back, she took a pain pill and got settled back in bed. But after she laid there for about 10 minutes, she felt like she was going to explode. The anxiety was so bad. Grabbing the crutches again, she headed out into the hall and stared at Three's bedroom door. She sighed. He'd be asleep. He'd worked hard and fought hard yesterday. He needed rest. She walked up and down the long hallway a few times, but that wasn't enough. She felt so closed in, so trapped. Turning, she headed down the stairs. Her breath was coming fast, as if she'd run a long way, and all she could think about was she had to get outside. She needed air. She needed open spaces, but she couldn't go out the back door to the beach. She'd learned that. Instead, she headed to the front door. Suddenly, all she could think about was getting out that door. Hoping and praying some alarm wouldn't sound, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. No alarm, thank goodness. Stepping out onto the large entryway, she drew a deep breath. The air was cool, which was comforting. She tried to see down to the front gate, but the front lawn was too hilly. Looking out across that lawn, all she wanted to do was get out there in the middle open space. Breathe. She started down the steps, being careful with the crutches, and headed out across the lawn, slowly, carefully, pulling in deep, huge breaths, trying to dispel the feeling of being closed in and trapped and suffocating. New scene. Ricky Keno picked up his phone when it buzzed. Yes? Sorry to wake you, sir, but Miss Jordan has left the premises. Ricky sat up. The beach? No, sir. She left out the front door and is walking in a southeast direction across the lawn. Thanks, Ricky said with a sigh. I'll have Eric see to her. You have eyes on her? Not physically. I'm just watching her on the monitor. Got it. Thanks. Yes, sir. Ricky called his son. Is everything okay, Dad? Young Eric said quickly. Jordan has made a run for it, Ricky said. Again? Good grief. Sorry, Dad, young Eric said as he got out of bed and pulled on some jeans. There's no need to apologize. She must be having a hard time to do it again. Could even be sleepwalking. She went out the front door and is heading across the lawn, southeast direction. Agent Mitchell is watching her on his monitor. Got it. I'm on my way. In seconds, young Eric was out the front door. He couldn't see her, but headed southeast. Only a minute later, he saw her, just as she took a tumble down a small hill. She was sitting up, rubbing her elbow as he approached. Are you okay? He asked. She drew in a sharp breath. 3? Jordan, what are you doing? She sniffed, and he realized she was crying. I don't know. I had to get out. I had to get away. Get away? From what? From who? I don't know. I felt like I was suffocating, like I was going to die. I felt like I needed to get out and get away, out into the open spaces, out and away. He knelt down in front of her. Baby, what's wrong? What brought this on? I don't know, she cried. I'm losing my mind. I felt like there were people in the room. I was all closed in. I couldn't get away. He was squeezing my throat so hard, and he was enjoying it. He was smiling. Eric looked carefully into her face. Jordan, are you awake? She looked up at him. Yes, I'm awake. I had a nightmare, though. All of them wanted me to suffer, wanted me to be afraid. They wanted me to die. All of them? She nodded as tears coursed down her cheeks. There were so many. They wanted to kill me. They're mad that I survived. I have to get away, out in the open. What is wrong with me? Okay, he said softly. Baby, aren't you cold? She shook her head. Please don't make me go back inside. I'm gonna die. I know it. Well, what if we go back inside and you come sleep with me in my room? Please, 3, please let me stay out here. Please. He blew out a breath and nodded. I'll be right back. Young Eric ran back into the house and into his closet, unhooked his sleeping bag from his bug-out pack, then pulled the comforter off his bed and 2 pillows and ran back outside. He got to Jordan, who was now lying on her back in the grass, her arms spread wide. He unzipped the sleeping bag until it was flat and spread it out on the lawn, threw one of the pillows on near the top edge, lifted Jordan, placed her on the sleeping bag. He then placed the other pillow under Jordan's cast, pulled his phone from his pocket, sat down next to Jordan, and pulled the comforter over both of them. Next, he texted his father. Don't worry, Jordan and I are having a little front yard camp out. I'll explain later. I'll let Agent Mitchell know. He sent that text and then another one to the agent at the gate, laid the phone by his pillow, and turned toward Jordan. Is this okay? She sniffed and nodded. I'm sorry to be so much trouble. It felt like I was going to die in there. I didn't mean to wake you. I thought maybe it was only the back doors that notified security, the ones to the beach where there is no gate. He chuckled. So, no offense, but you weren't thinking very clearly. Instead of laughing, she started to cry again. Oh, come on now, 23. I'm just teasing you. It was supposed to make you laugh, he said, as he scooted in closer to her, turning onto his right side. She sniffed. I'm sorry, I guess I don't feel like laughing. Then what do you feel like? I mean, tell me what's going on in your brain. She wiped at her tears. I don't know if I can even explain. Try, she sighed. It feels like chaos, commotion, like a bunch of people talking and whispering at the same time. It feels sad. It feels scary. I can see that guy's eyes glaring at me, looking into my eyes as he strangled me. He wanted me dead. He wanted to kill me. I know it. I can feel it. And he still wants me dead. Young Eric blew out a breath. This was much more complicated than he realized. He stroked her face. What did you and Granddad talk about yesterday? Shaking her head, she thought hard. We talked about God and why he would allow something like this to happen to me, and that even though it was happening, God was right there with me. He told me to not be afraid because God wasn't going to let anyone kill me. He told me that I'm one of God's warriors and that I have to get strong physically, mentally, and spiritually. And he wants to train me. Young Eric rose up and looked down at her. Really? She nodded. He said God is nudging him to train me to be strong. He said I was important, which I don't understand. Well, I do. So are you going to train with Granddad? It scares me, and I don't know if I have enough time, but I also know I'd be crazy to turn down being trained by the Grandmaster Kino. Well, don't let it scare you. He wouldn't be so mean and strict on you like he is on me. He expects a lot from me because I've been training my whole life. He'd go easy on you. Well, at least he will at first. She nodded. I'll probably do it, when I'm with you, just lying here talking to you. I'm okay. I feel normal. But when you're not around, I feel so vulnerable and so scared. I hate that I've become so emotionally dependent on you that I can barely function. Baby, it's only because of this attack. You were functioning fine until that. You've attended classes, you cleaned your apartment, you were all alone without Agent Trout, and you were fine. It's just because you were attacked and really beaten up pretty severely. What you feel is normal. And you should know, right? He sighed. Right. Except I wasn't hurt as badly as you. He ran his hand over her hair and turned her head and kissed her softly. She gave a soft moan. Right now, everything seems fine, like I can handle anything. But earlier, when I had to get out of the house, it felt like I was suffocating, like I was being strangled all over again. I thought, if this doesn't stop, if I keep feeling like this, then I don't want to live anymore. And what? He rose up and looked down at her. You actually thought that? She blinked up at him. I'm just telling you what was in my head. Well, those are very dangerous thoughts, Jordan. You thought you'd rather be dead? You thought you'd rather leave me? This is not good. I wouldn't do anything to leave you, Eric. I wouldn't, kill myself. Well, many people who attempt suicide and fail say that a few months before they tried, the moment never crossed their minds. The thought never crossed their minds. 3, I would never leave you, not on purpose. Well, then don't entertain any thoughts of you not living anymore. Period. Not any. But if you do, you tell me right away. Do you hear me? She giggled. Calm down, 3. I hear you loud and clear. He blew out a breath. Okay. Sorry, but I love you, Jordan, and I have plans for you and me, and I need you to be by my side. So for now, let's do what I had planned when I brought out the blankets and pillows. Oh, that sounds intriguing. He chuckled. Good. So lie on your back. She straightened her body, and he did too. Now, let's look up at the sky. What do you see? I see a few stars. He said as he sat back up. He picked up his phone and sent a text. A minute later, the lights along the iron fence went out. He laid back down. Now what do you see? A lot more stars. They're so beautiful. Have you ever been camping? No. We'll have to go one day. When we get away from the city lights out in the wilderness, you'd be amazed how the stars just fill up the entire sky. I can't wait to show you that. But for now, just look up at the sky and take a deep breath. Breathe in. Good. Now out. In. Now out. Now I want you to breathe in to the count of 4 and then out to the count of 7. Ready? Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had her do it several times. Do you feel a little more centered? Yes, she said softly. I actually feel sleepy. Good. He sat up, took the pillow out from under her cast, turned on his side, and placed the pillow on his thigh. Turn toward me, Jordan, and put your knee on my hip and your foot on the pillow. She smiled as she looked into his eyes. He also smiled. There, much better. She sighed, so much better. Close your eyes, he commanded softly. When she did, he leaned forward and softly kissed each eyelid. Then he went over her face with his lips, kissing each spot, each cheek, her forehead, her nose, her chin, her lips. She moaned softly. He let his lips skim her jaw, then he moved down to her neck and her shoulders. Then he lifted her left hand and kissed each fingertip. She sighed with pleasure. Her eyes fluttered closed as she totally relaxed. Did that feel good? He whispered. So good. He put his arm around her and pulled her tight up against him. One day, Jordan, I'm going to kiss every single inch of you. She breathed a deep sigh and allowed herself the bliss of falling asleep in his arms. And that is the end of chapter 11.